Hello and welcome to episode 152 of Simply Tax. Now I have to warn you, on the podcast today, we're covering a topic that has the potential to make you lose some sleep, or perhaps feel a bit uncomfortable. It's a topic that I find means something very different to different people, and often means something very different to the same person at different phases of their life. It's something that can seem mysterious and perhaps elusive, and I'll bet that we're all guilty of at least one time in our lives, clicking on an article with an irresistible title promising a secret tip or a hack to achieving success. And that's why I'm excited to share with you on the podcast today a conversation I had with FORVIS Private Client Advisors Carlee Lynn and Zach Swartz to help you and I both cut through the static of accumulating wealth. Before we get into our topic, let's spend a little bit of time getting to know Carlee and Zach.
My name is Carlee Lynn. I got into the finance industry through a financial 101 class that they offered at my high school. And I was just really kind of inspired by that. And so I started looking into programs around me, which I landed at MSU in their financial planning program. So I went through that and also studied risk management and insurance as well. And that path led me to the Certified Financial Planner certification and getting connected with FORVIS and the wealth management team here because they were doing exactly what I wanted to do, which was planning for clients. So it kind of connected perfectly with everything I had studied and kind of, we did case studies in school and, solving these problems for clients. And it was perfect because it combines my love for math and problem solving with actually feeling like I'm making a difference for people. So not just making dreams come true, but actually helping them achieve those little things along the way that makes a difference for them in their personal life. They have more time for their kids and spend time on family and stuff they want to and not have to worry about the finances that we're taking care of.
Yeah, the class in high school. Was there something in particular about it or just kind of overall that really kind of drew you to the space?
Yeah, so what I think it really was that he talked about so many different topics. There was such a wide variety of things that you can use to kind of put together to help with the whole financial plan. So I really liked how intricate and detailed it is. And then you can also see the big picture as well. So I think that was kind of what interested me in it. It's also an emotional thing for people too. So you can be detail oriented and kind of get to nerd out if that's your thing. But then you also get to connect with people and make a difference for them with something that seems so dry and basic sometimes.
You're kind of reaffirming why I decided to go into tax and specifically in the space. So I appreciate that. So. All right, Zach, who are you? I guess I know we got your name, but what do you do and why do you do it?
Yeah, so I'm Zach Swartz, and my background, I have a degree in finance with a minor in economics. I also studied at Missouri State University. I guess all the way back to high school, I thought I was going to be an engineer, but decided to switch schools and switch majors essentially as I was reviewing college options for myself. I am in this space because growing up, my dad actually owned his own business. And so I got to see how business ownership tied into private or personal wealth. And I really was drawn to the complexity, like Carlee said. I'm trying to solve hard problems with math. Out of Missouri State, I studied for the Charter Financial Analyst exam and did that and was actually our first investment intern here at FORVIS. And I've been doing this for 16 years here.
And it's gone by quickly, I'm sure, right?
I feel like I started yesterday.
Maybe to help us get to know you a little better, and Zach, I'll start with you on this one. So if you could take a dream vacation anywhere, where would it be and why?
My wife and I would probably want to go to Paris. I think that would be a great vacation for us. And then personally, she's less interested in this, but I have this other desire to visit Asia, specifically Tokyo. I think would be a lot of fun. I'm just intrigued by specifically Japan. They have an interesting woodworking area. They have a specialty in that and the way that they do woodworking. So I think it'd be fun to go to Tokyo and see the city and then go through more of the rural areas and see some of the craftsmen that they have there.
Now, you know the question I'm going to ask you here, Carlee. So what about you, vacation-wise? What would it be and why?
So I would love to get to spend a Christmas time in Norway or Finland because it's just so homey feeling and you see, the snow on the roofs and the paved streets and the street lights that look antique. I think that would be a really fun way just to spend at least one Christmas there.
So now we know the two of you. Maybe tell me a little bit more about the team and the work that you do in the space.
So Zach and I are part of what we call the Wealth Accumulation Team within the private client space. So really what that means is the clients that we serve maybe look a little bit different than some of the other clients of the firm in the private client sector. So for example, accumulating wealth, when we say, what does that mean when we're talking about working with wealth accumulation type clients? So accumulating wealth, or someone who would still be in their high earning years, they haven't fully reached all their career goals that they want to yet. They're not retired. They're still in savings mode, and they really are just working towards some goals still. So they're working, earning. There's no age limit with that either. So a lot of times we do work with younger people, but what is younger, right? So it's really more of the stage of life that you're in and that area of your career and your family. And that does kind of lend itself to certain categories that we typically work within more often than not. So that would include like small business owners and entrepreneurs who are building their own business for themselves. And we do work with a lot of physicians as well who are still accumulating that wealth and even navigating their student loan debt too. So I know that having student loan debt can make some physicians think that they don't qualify to work with a wealth management firm, but we see a lot of that and we help with a lot of those conversations as well. We also work with a lot of multi-generational families, more specifically the second and third generations. That's one of my favorite parts, is to kind of see the whole family picture and then meet each generation separately and together, because you learn about how the generosity and the leadership of the first generation, the grandparents, has like trickled down, and you hear about each, how grateful each generation is separately and how it's like affected and motivated them. So that's one of the coolest parts that we do, I think, for people we work with.
What does that look like, and kind of what does that involve when working through? I mean, is it kind of the same thing for everybody, or does it maybe depend on their circumstances, on their situation?
Yeah, great question. So the answer is yes, it's very client dependent. And so maybe to drive home one of the points that Carlee just made about this, when we talk about wealth accumulation and different stages of accumulating wealth, it's really not age dependent. So I've had clients, and we have clients who maybe they retired from the military as an example after a career, and they're going into a second career or starting a business afterwards. So technically you could call them a retiree, but they're still accumulating wealth in different ways. We work, as Carlee said, a lot with business owners, and in the private client space, I always find that very interesting because it requires us to have the full team at the table, because you're navigating really the complexity of building the wealth within the business, but also diversifying wealth outside of the business and navigating how to move cash around, what the best tax strategy is with our tax team, and then the financial plans to make sure we achieve those goals. And I think that's, if you look at each client, that's going to be very specific to their type of business, their cash needs, and their goals. So I think it is very client specific, and when we're diving into the weeds with every bit of what a client wants to achieve.
Maybe you talk through like a real world example here, because I'm a big believer of kind of that multidisciplinary team. And I think that, with the complexity and the number of things going on anymore, like you really do need a multidisciplinary team that's involved that can help and look at things from different perspectives. So I don't know, maybe like you talked about the entrepreneur, business owner type. What's a way that maybe the members of the team that you've seen kind of work together in a successful way?
I have a number of business owner clients, and even recently we've been working with a few. COVID's been interesting for our business owner clients. So generally speaking, they were pretty successful over the COVID years. It's really navigating that process, right? So you've had some successful years. You're building wealth in your business, which most entrepreneurs, that's going to be the driver of their wealth into the future, right? So we're not, from my standpoint, as more of the investment arm of the relationship where we're dealing with portfolio management and economics, what I do day to day is placing trades to diversify wealth and building strategies to execute within that client portfolio. But really, I know that for most of my clients, the business is going to generate the majority of their wealth through time. So it's really about how do we take maybe risk out of that, right? How do we diversify across? And the second you start to have that conversation, Damien, I think you have to talk about, from a financial planning standpoint, what's the goal? Why would we want to do that? And then really importantly, what's the tax impact of that distribution, or is it higher wages? What are we going to do to get that money potentially out of the business, or is it best to leave it within the business? And I think that's where each piece of the team has to come together, because you're trying to match the personal goals of that client, which include building the wealth in the business, the health of the business, which is generally where our tax team would come in and say, yes, the business is successful. How do we navigate the tax impact of moving this money around? And then if the money is out and investable, that's where someone like myself would come in and say, okay, now how do we invest the money to meet those goals?
A lot of times people want to know, what do I really have at the end of the day? And taxes can be some of the largest expenses of a business at times over the years, particularly in an exit event. So you really have to pay attention to that, right? Not to overemphasize the importance of tax, but I kind of think it's a big deal. So, but Carlee, I guess like you mentioned, like physicians, even those that have the student loans and wouldn't think, okay, I'm a candidate for financial planning and accumulating wealth. I don't know, do you have a situation or an example maybe that you've seen that financial planning has really been able to help someone in that situation?
I've worked with several physicians who are just kind of beginning to actually practice in their career. And so that's really exciting time for them, because they have been in school and training for a very long time and worked really hard to begin their actual career, and see patients. And this student loan debt, those payments turn on as well at the same time. So they're excited and they're starting to earn those bigger paychecks, but then the debt is there and it needs to be figured out. Like, how do they start to pay it? So commonly where we begin is, what type of loans do they have and what's the amount and what's that going to look like? So I'll put together an analysis for them on, repayment options and what that can be. Sometimes we go down the public student loan forgiveness path and work through that with them just to see if they're eligible and if it makes sense to kind of work towards that, because if so, we like to get started on pretty quickly with that. Beyond that, once things kind of move a little further, we look at their goals and make a financial plan to show them that even though they feel like maybe they got started late in their career with saving because their earnings, they increased rapidly, but it came a little bit later in life than maybe some of their non-physician professional friends. But we like to use our financial planning software and investment strategies to show them that they can still be right on track and successful and have the same retirement that they always wanted, even though they're just beginning a little bit later in their life. So we have really worked on specialized planning to help them feel confident in that. But I think it's important too, we work with the CPA for tax planning to make sure that when we're navigating the student loan debt, that we make the right decisions with the tax side as well, because there's some big changes that you need to make it all work together. We have a lot of joint meetings, just bringing all the analysis to the CPA and showing them kind of where we're at and having them chime in on what they think the best strategy would be from a tax standpoint.
The question that kind of comes to mind is maybe then when do you know it's a good time to hire a financial advisor? We talked about some of those situations, again, that maybe don't come first to mind, because even back to the business owner, the entrepreneur, many I know, right, any of the excess cash is going back into the business and trying to continue to fuel that growth of the business. When is a good time?
This is a very common question, and people probably have it in the back of their mind as they begin to earn more and accumulate some more wealth. And typically, I think it shows up and creeps in on you. So you'll have situations when you're dealing with your personal finances where you just kind of think, I could use a little bit of help with this. It feels a little bit out of my depth, but you deal with it and you move on. And eventually those will add up to a multitude of things where hiring a financial advisor can help you in many different ways. And that will kind of trigger for you that it's time when they can help you with many different aspects of your finances that you're dealing with. And I would also say, it's always the right time to see if it's the right time. So set up an introduction meeting, meet with them, see if it feels right, if there's going to be value added. And if it's not the right time, they'll tell you that and you can wait and move on. I know Zach and I have had a lot of those conversations where there's people who are just ready to go and they're chomping at the bit, and we meet with them, but it doesn't make sense for them to be paying an advisor's fees right now. So we just kind of wait and we check in with them and we see later on as they build more wealth and move up and on in their career, when does it really make sense that we could start taking some of that financial responsibility from them? So I think that helps with kind of when you're thinking, do I really need an advisor? Just what do you need help with and how can they help you do that?
I would just add that it's true that most people that are trying to do this on their own are doing a lot of research. And as you're doing research, I think some things are very obvious that, hey, this applies to me in my situation. I think it makes sense to talk to someone else when you're thinking, does this apply to me? How do I know if it applies to me? And then, especially to Carlee's point, as you grow your wealth, the ramifications of bad decisions continues to increase. And so you want to find out, is this right for me and my family? And then make sure you execute appropriately. And I think once you start to navigate, whether you're reading blogs or research, and you say, I think this would work, you probably want to just call and make sure that it would work. It's always good to get that second opinion.
What if you almost don't even know where to start? I mean, there's a lot of jargon out there. How do you even know if you're asking the right question, or if it's literally, you don't even know what the word is that you're looking at here in this article? How do you suggest approaching that?
If you're doing your own research and you start to read articles and you don't understand what's being said, there are a lot of great resources to continue to educate yourself. There is a lot of jargon. And the thing that I find is that everything is pretty specific, and whether a rule applies to you and your family is very dependent on your own circumstances. I think you can get only so far through the research, and then it helps to have trusted advisors just to ask the question to. The internet's full of information, and our job is not to necessarily regurgitate that information to our clients. Our job is to say, does this apply to my clients? And if so, how do we execute it effectively? And I think that is where our clients find the value, is that wisdom to try and guide them through the conversations. The hope is when we're working with clients, we're using less of that jargon so that they understand what we're saying. I think of my job as really to take really complex things and make them as simple as possible. If every client that I'm talking to can understand what I'm saying, then that's a win. Because in my experience, if a client doesn't feel comfortable with what you're talking about or the strategy you're going to execute, they're much less likely to see it through. And in what I do in investing, usually the worst time to make a decision is when things feel the worst. By coaching someone through and keeping things as simple as possible, it helps them maintain the plan that we have put out from the beginning with the financial planning and the tax team.
Is there a common piece of jargon that you find that people struggle with, or that you find yourself simplifying? I mean, again, Zach, you're kind of speaking my language here of simplifying the complex. I don't know. Is there a piece of jargon you can simplify for us right now on Simply Tax?
I would start with something that's probably not necessarily jargon. People think they understand what it means, but I think it means something different for everybody. So when we talk about something like retirement planning, and we're talking about it in the context of wealth accumulation, I think of financial planning as more of being goal driven, right? So when you're maybe mid-career, retirement can be so far out. And if the only planning you're doing is for retirement, you may be missing the boat on some things. And so there are ways to navigate financial planning that isn't retirement driven. Like we were talking about with our business owners, I work with entrepreneurs who are talking about expanding their business. And so now the goal is not necessarily to, how do I in 30 years retire from what I'm doing? It's really about, how do I build wealth such that I can now expand my business and continue to grow where my wealth is being created. And I think the average person walking in is, oh, I'm just going to talk to my financial advisor about retirement planning or education planning. And that's part of it, but it's really, what do you want to achieve? And then really putting the whole team together to achieve those goals.
When it comes to something like retirement planning, I mean, I don't know, when you're starting out early in your career, like, retirement's a long ways away, and you can think of a whole lot of things you'd maybe rather do before getting to that. And maybe you put it off, or you kind of avoid thinking about it. Or again, I mean, why do I want to wait 30 years to benefit from what I'm doing here? Agree with that? Or do you see that when you're working with those that are accumulating wealth?
Yeah, definitely. And I know we discussed earlier the multi-generational families too. And it's really cool whenever I get to meet even a third generation. And I know generation 1 and 2. So third generation would be like the grandkids. You can kind of see that impatience a little bit in the grandkids, right? Because they see the wealth and the end game so clearly in front of them in their grandparents and their parents. And they just want to get there. They just want to kind of jump forward to getting to experience that. How I would guide them is just be really intentional with your finances that you have today. So save where you need to save, learn about the different types of accounts, and have a plan for saving towards retirement, but also just make it fun for yourself. So have like an investment account that you have that works for you today. So it's not just a retirement account. So an individual investment account that's you can kind of watch, and it's money that you have access to right now. Not that you have to access it, but you can. And that little bit of freedom, that change in I could have it now if I wanted to, and I don't have to lock it up until retirement, I think that gives them ownership over their investments and their money, and is really encouraging when you start to see those numbers build even little by little over like 3 or 5 years. And I've seen how that can really kickstart the other savings and investing that they get encouraged to do, because it's not just something intangible and so far off.
I've thought too around, as you're accumulating wealth, sometimes you start thinking about, particularly, phases of life, right? So as you start to have a family and then you start thinking, well, gosh, I want to maybe plan and save for college for them. Does that enter into the wealth accumulation phase? I don't know if that comes as a question of saying, well, I'm trying to accumulate for my retirement, but then I've got a few college tuitions I'm going to be paying for here, or, whatever in the future. How do you balance those two things, or how do you help guide people to balance those two things?
That's a really common thing that we deal with, kind of competing goals. So that's similar to physicians where they have competing goals, right? Saving for retirement and paying down debt and funding college for their kids that they have as well. So what we work through is we like to prioritize their goals and see, what's your extra income that's left over each month. And we're going to see where that can go to work for you the best. So we never want to say you have to save this much here and you have to save this much here, but we'll work with the planning software we have to kind of show them what different amounts will get them in the future. If we put a little bit here for this amount of time and a little bit here, here's how that will affect your different goals that you have, and kind of allow them to see that by prioritizing, your extra dollars and sending them where they need to be, that it can really make the plan seem a lot easier to achieve.
I would add and echo that. I think one of the things that we find in wealth accumulation space is, where does my next dollar go? And one of the things as a team that our goal is really to help people prioritize. We're not going to tell you what your goals are. We're just going to make sure what you share with us, we're going to make sure we fund it well. And if we're pushing one of the goals off because cash flow is a little tight right now due to the stage of life, that's okay. Let's make sure it's not the most important goal that we're pushing off, because everybody's situation is a little bit different. And I think you see this with young physicians sometimes, where they may join a partnership and the more senior partners are just in a different stage of life. And so they can be drawn to making different investments or spending money in different ways, that it's important to recognize that you're just at a different stage of life. You'll eventually be there, but today you may not be. And so our job, I believe, is partially just keeping people focused on what they're telling us is important.
Hypothetical here for you, Zach. So you're a young partner just kind of starting out as partner in a professional services organization, and you don't even really know what your goals are because you've been focusing on other things. And you say, okay, I'm not going to help you determine your goals. You got to decide that. But what if you don't even know where to start with your goals?
Yeah, that's the benefit of working with a team who's worked with a lot of different professionals, I think. So we can easily say, here are some important goals we normally see, whether it's young partners in professional services firms, young physicians joining private practice or joining a partnership. We generally see college funding being a priority, some version of debt control, cash flow management, just the common financial planning. But the key there is it's applied to them personally. So we can start at a very high level and say, here are the top 3 goals we see generally. Do these apply to you? And it's fun to have those conversations because we learn something new too. Some families, even that young partner joining, they may be dealing with like elder care issues. Maybe they're dealing with elderly parents. That's not something that you can just say everybody has that issue, but we need to be able to navigate that. And if that's a main goal for them, we can do that.
That's probably part of the biggest challenge maybe sometimes is deciding what's important and prioritizing, because that changes, I imagine. Is there an element to that of kind of having to check in? Because what if you decide your prioritization has changed? Like, how do you deal with that when you're working with somebody?
That's not uncommon for sure, that over time, clients will see that what was really important to them early on in their career, when they haven't had a lot of life happen yet, kind of changes a couple years down the road after things happen and life happens to them. One thing that I find happens in meetings a lot is the client won't straight out say, this is my goal, or I don't want that goal anymore. You just kind of hear what they're not saying when they say, like, this debt is stressing me out. Maybe that means the goal has prioritized that they really want to pay off the debt more than they want the lake house. So you got to kind of walk through, what they're telling you maybe isn't goals 1, 2, 3, and 4, but it's what they're feeling and what's kind of playing out in their life behind the scenes when they're not sitting in a conference room with you. So you just help them kind of feel out, well, what is life telling you is really important right now? How can we redirect our course for you to help you get on the right path for meeting those newer prioritized goals?
That's good to know. Because I feel like for a lot of people, I'll even just think about kind of myself, right? You don't necessarily, especially growing up, you're not necessarily talking about financial planning as much. At least that wasn't kind of the way it was discussed in my house growing up. It was just sort of something that was handled and kind of had a general sense, but we weren't really involved, at least. And I know there's differences. Maybe that's kind of common that you're not used to talking about money, and maybe it's a little uncomfortable to talk, to sit down. You seem like a very nice and unintimidating person, Carlee, but I don't know. Like, if I have to start talking about, my finances, I don't know. Do you find that that's something that's challenging for people, or how do you overcome that, I guess?
Yeah, money, I think, is one of those taboo topics that you don't bring up, right? People start talking about money and it gets a little tight-lipped in the room. But when we're in a meeting, that's what we're there to talk about. And we're not just there to talk about your money. How much do you make? How much do you have saved? What's our rate of return? And we're there to talk about your life and how money gets you the life you want. And I don't want you to worry about money. I just want you to have a good life that you want to live. Enjoy your job, enjoy your family, and I'll take care of the money part. Let me worry about your money. But that can be a little bit hard when you're sitting across from maybe someone who is really new to saving and investing. And so they feel intimidated by the jargon and the meeting and the types of accounts. They don't understand it. So we work through a lot of education and just kind of, okay, here's what you need to know to feel comfortable that you trust us. And then as things get more complex, we'll bring in the other members of the team and we'll explain those complex parts to you as well. But when you leave here, just don't worry about it. Just trust that, we're going to take care of you and bring strategies to you. And we'll send you an email, give you a call if there's anything we need. But that's really what Zach and I's job to do, is to take care of the behind the scenes so that client can kind of live their life and not have to worry about it. And so when they talk to us about their goals and how life is going and how the extra income going into the investment account and not into their pocket feels on a month-to-month basis, we ask clients that a lot. We're like, let's try this out for a couple months and see how it feels when the extra in the bank is less because you've started investing it. So it's just having the conversation in a different way, not saying let's talk numbers, but let's talk about your life and how these financial goals affect your life. So oftentimes our clients' goals don't even have a dollar amount attached to them. They're just a thing, an event, a checkpoint that the client gets to, and it's our job to figure out the math behind that.
So, all right, we've kind of talked theoretical on some of these things. I want some tips here. So, if you're going to give me like three tips, I don't know, you must get this like if you go to like cocktail parties, if that's even a thing anymore, or meeting up with people, you must get like, they're always looking for tips. So I'm going to get in line here and ask for tips. So Zach, 3 tips that you would give to those that are kind of in that wealth accumulating phase of life?
Given that I build portfolios for people, often folks approach me with the stock tip or the economic trend or what's the best thing to invest in today. But my really boring tips are generally more planning related early on, and it is start with an emergency fund. So this is the person who actually invests money for people telling you to own cash, which is not exciting. But I think that's the base level. If you have a good emergency fund, we've just seen this play out so many times, you worry less about the riskier investments you're making. So having a strong emergency fund, in general terms, it could be 3 to 6 months. It could be up to 12 months. That's really family dependent on expenses and income. But having an emergency fund that makes you feel comfortable is very important. The next point I would make, and this applies across the board, but generally see it more with our physician clients, where recognizing the benefit of net worth, right? So this is one of those jargon terms. Net worth is simply the assets you have minus the liabilities you have. And so when you think about that starting out as a young attending physician, generally you have negative net worth. You have a lot of student loan debt, and you're just now starting to accumulate assets. And I think it's important for those folks to understand that paying down debt is actually a way to build net worth. When you're thinking about building wealth through time, all we're talking about is net worth. Eventually you want more assets than debts, and over time you want to grow your assets. And one of the ways to grow your net worth early on as a young attending physician is really to pay down that debt and having a good plan for that. And so when we're talking to those folks, it's really about my next dollar. Should I pay down debt or should I invest? And we work through the numbers. And then my last point would be retirement savings generally within company retirement plans is a great place to start. 401k plans, 403b plans. You don't need to overcomplicate investing and try to swing for the fence with your very first investment. Maybe the boring approach is best. And what I find is systematic savings works through time. So let the compound interest of just investing in the markets on a regular basis work to your advantage.
All right, Carlee, what are your 3 tips here?
One of the high points I like to hit is probably another one that seems a little bit boring, but kind of to start with general budgeting. And what I mean by budgeting isn't a restrictive, I can't spend this money and I must save a bunch. I just mean to know what money you have coming in and be intentional with where it goes. So just have a plan for it. Don't let it just kind of sit out there and, well, I think I'm not spending more than I make. Be really focused on just having an intentional spot for where your money's going to go once it comes in. And if you take a little bit of ownership over that, I think it makes a big difference, especially in younger professionals' lives, for sure. The second one I would say is to avoid or beware of financial evil. So we kind of have a little joke among our team that we fight financial evil. And when I say that, I just mean to watch out for maybe professionals, and rather that's any type of professional that you might utilize their services who might not have your best interest in mind or might be thinking a little bit more about how it affects them to take advantage of you being their client. So we definitely would recommend finding someone who is a fiduciary. And that word just means they're legally held to a higher standard in their recommendations and they have to put the client first. So that can help you avoid some just being taken advantage of when you are just trying to learn what it means to start with getting help with your finances, and you really don't want to have to be set back by getting tripped up with that. And then the last point that I would have would just be start somewhere in your finances, start small, just focus on one area and get that working for you and have that taken care of. So whether that's building your emergency fund, like Zach mentioned, and making sure you have enough cash to cover an emergency, or if you're to the point where you start an investment account or you have had enough complicated income that it's time to have a CPA prepare your taxes, right? So whatever it is, whatever little thing in your finances you can take control of to get it really working in your favor, just kind of start there and then see where that leads you with the rest of your financials. So
those are really good. I like those because they're also, it keeps with our theme of simple, and not necessarily easy, but simple conceptually. I can wrap my head around all those. So maybe also need to get you some capes or something for fighting financial evil or something. I don't know. We'll have to work on that. But biggest sense I'm getting here, in addition to some really great ideas and just better understanding how those that are accumulating wealth can kind of think about it and get some help, is that you both really enjoy what you do, right? I mean, there's a passion to it. So maybe, Carlee, I'll start with you on this one. What do you like most about what you do?
that's hard for me to choose, honestly.
Sure. Yeah, fair.
I absolutely love being an advisor. And my best days are when I have a meeting or even just a phone call and I actually answered a question that was emotional and meaningful for someone. So they were like, oh, like you could kind of see or hear the light bulb or the sigh of relief. And they were like, oh, thank you. Like that really helped. That was all I needed. Okay, I'm good to go. And they leave and you can tell that there's an impact made there. Those are my best days and my favorite meetings, where you just kind of forget you're in a meeting, but somehow something still got done and they leave and they're satisfied with what we covered. So that's my best thing. I love connecting with my clients and really having those meaningful conversations that I get to be a little bit of a nerd in and include some financial planning topics that I've studied, but they really are personalized to the client that's sitting in front of me and they really make an impact.
Zach, what do you enjoy most?
The clients. My clients are my favorite part of my job. They all have very interesting stories, interesting goals, and generally speaking, we have the fortune to work with very successful people. You know, whether everyone's working towards goals, and I think in my mind, what we're trying to do is help them accelerate or be a little piece of their story. And I think that's the exciting thing for me is learning what my client stories are and how we can help them reach those goals and be just a little piece of it and make sure that they're successful.
We've covered kind of a lot of ground, I think, in between. So maybe a closing thought or idea or call to action that you would leave with our listeners here today. Zach, what do you got for us?
I would reiterate one thing Carlee said, and it's just start. Right? So start thinking about it a little bit. Don't be intimidated. It can be really intimidating to talk about money, and generally find people you trust and make sure that you have the ability to ask questions. Someone who's got your best interest at heart is going to try and give you the best advice possible and not try and sell you anything. And I think that's an important distinction to understand, that just starting to ask the questions is the first step.
Again, you keep it simple, Zach, but not easy. Carlee, what do you think? What's kind of a closing thought that you leave our listeners with?
The first thing that comes to mind when talking to people who are in the wealth accumulation stage of life is celebrate the success that you've had up to this point. Be super excited about where you're at right now, but sit down and definitely make goals for yourself. And that's something I struggled with personally and professionally. When I joined the firm, I joined a team of really driven, goal-oriented individuals. And I didn't have a bucket list, a personal one. I did not have a professional one. I just wanted to show up every day and do a really good job and then go home. So I had to develop that. And I have found that in doing that, it really opened my eyes to what I'm capable of and what I really want out of life. So I would say be really excited about where you've got to. Acknowledge the hard work that you've put in to get you where you're at, but set some goals for yourself personally, financially, professionally, and then figure out where to get started to reach those.
Do you want to learn more about the topics we discussed today, or perhaps connect with Carlee, Zach, or another FORVIS Private Client advisor? Check out the show notes of this episode, available at forvis.com/simplytax, for additional resources and more about our guests today. We want to know what you think of the podcast. Please leave Simply Tax a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. FORVIS is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax, legal, or investment advisor before acting on any matters covered.